Okay. All right. It's time for the third panel, so let me introduce the moderator. And by the way, I have moderated a lot of events for the Middle East Policy Council, and it's harder than being the master of ceremonies, substantially harder. It's substantive. The moderator is Mr. Hugh Eakin, senior editor of the New York Review of Books, and a frequent contributor as well. He has a special interest in the politics and the cultural heritage of the Middle East and has reported from numerous Middle Eastern countries, including Oman, as well as countries in Europe. And he's a founding editor of NYRblog, which is the New York Review's online magazine. He has taught at Columbia University's School of Journalism, Graduate School of Journalism, one of the best, and is the author of several books. I do not speak Chinese, but I think it's Liu Xiaobo. Empty Chair. Liu Xiaobo's Empty Chair, and Yasmine al-Rashidi's The Battle for Egypt, and Charles Simic's Confessions of a Poet Laureate. He holds degrees from two reputable universities, Harvard University and Cambridge University. Mr. Eakin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm excited to be moderating this panel on economics and economic development following Governor Huntsman's talk, which was as good an introduction as we could have had to, I think, the subjects that our panelists are going to be exploring in greater depth. And I just wanted to make two quick points. One is that it seems that economic development is a huge part of the Omani story today, and a huge part of the Omani success story. And it's also a huge part of the challenges ahead, as Governor Huntsman discussed in terms of diversification, the labor force, and developing the private sector. So it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce a panel which will have expertise in each of these areas. And in addition to being a modern story, economic development, as I know from my own experience in Oman earlier this year, you go to the port of Muscat, Matra, and you immediately see, almost as in no other Gulf country, the extent to which trading and commerce is an ancient tradition in Oman. And you have trading families that have gone back generations and that predate the era of oil. So the history is visible and it's there, and it's also, I think, part of the future, although I think our panelists will say more about that. So without further ado, I want to introduce our three panelists, a historian, an economist, and an economic development expert. So we have a nice mix of views. And we're going to start with our historian, Dr. Alan Fromhertz, a historian at Georgia State University. He has written widely on the Gulf. He's vice president of the American Institute for Maghreb Studies, author of several books, A History of Qatar, a book about Ibn Khaldun, and most recently has been in Oman doing research on the 19th century Sultan, Said bin Sultan, who was so important in some of the developments between early relations between America and Oman that were talked about earlier today. And as he tells me, he is now working on a larger book about the Gulf itself. And he will be talking about the sort of history of economic development in Oman. And I'll turn it over to him first.
Thank you so much, Hugh. I'm an avid reader at the NYRB. In fact, I have a 3-year-long subscription that I renew every 3 years because I just love getting that journal in my mailbox. My real point here is that culture counts. Culture matters. So often when we look at oil-based economies, we look at an empty barrel, and we look only at economic statistics. But I think Oman is a very good example of why that model fails, and why we can't make general assumptions about oil and economy. And I just wanted to preface my argument with that. In a mere 44 years, less than the lifespan of a middle-aged adult, Oman experienced economic changes that took Europe and the United States at least 6 generations. From a pre-industrial insular economy with infrastructure consisting of only 6 miles of asphalt between Muscat and Beit al-Falaj and 3 primary schools, Oman went through a boom after 1970, the year His Majesty Sultan Qaboos came to power. There was celebration on the streets throughout the country that summer of 1970, as Omanis seemed to sense a new era was at hand. These revelers were not to be disappointed. Although concrete examples only provide a part of the picture, and many of the changes cannot be quantified, some statistics reflect the magnitude of change over a very short period of time. The mileage of asphalt roads in Oman expanded 150-fold between 1970 and 1979. Electricity was introduced, a major desalination plant was built, and even color television was beamed to villages where there had been no access to the outside world before. Before 1970, there were no international docking ports, no international airport, and telephone lines were basically limited to the palace and high government ministers. Within 10 years, all of this had changed. And Oman once again claimed its place as a strategic, economic, and geographic fulcrum between Africa, Asia, and the Gulf. Economic progress, although perhaps not as dramatic as the first decade, has maintained a rapid and steady course. In 2012, the UN Human Development Index declared Oman, quote, the most improved nation on the entire earth. The Omani Renaissance, as this transformation has been called, brought hundreds of thousands out of poverty. For Omani, as for scholars and specialists in the region, Oman's development is a remarkable, if fairly well-known story. The aim of this paper must therefore be modest, to focus on a somewhat neglected feature of Oman's economic change, features that make what I want to call the Oman model of development unique. Okay. Omanis themselves are the best experts on the transformations that have caused a rebirth of their country, as they are justly proud of their nation's transformation. Nevertheless, there are some unique aspects of what could be called the Oman model of modernization that have either not received a great deal of attention or are hidden within statistical and purely financial considerations of GDP, infrastructure projects, and utilization of oil wealth. Having studied economic modernization in other GCC countries, namely in my book, Qatar, A Modern History, sorry for the plug, I will focus on 2 particular aspects of Oman's development that merit attention beyond the sheer scale of economic change. First, unlike other GCC states, Oman's development can be seen as a true renaissance, a true rebirth, as the translation of that word really means. Its once prominent position in the Gulf and in the Indian Ocean under Sayyid Said bin Sultan, this picture is actually from the Peabody Essex Museum, was a remarkable period that has only been reborn today. So instead of seeing the recent progress as some sort of exception, it's actually the period before the progress that was the exception, not the rule. Second, Oman's Renaissance was not simply top-down. It relied on the willingness of the people of Oman to engage with the Sultan. The Renaissance was built on several pre-existing social structures. Okay? Here's a little bit about the Sayyid Said's diplomacy. But here is a picture I took. I had the opportunity on the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center Fellowship, which I'm very grateful to the SQCC for providing that opportunity, of the Majlis culture within Oman. It's a very deeply rooted part of Omani society that consultation is, and Governor Huntsman mentioned this too, the town square concept. This is still a very living part of Oman society. and something that actually is expressed in other parts of the Gulf as well. But consultation, rather than simply top-down directives, allowed for the Sultan to be so successful. Indeed, the Sultan's ability to unify a highly diverse country with many different religions, ethnic, and even linguistic differences has paid dividends in terms of the social stability and cohesion necessary for economic development. According to several measures, including the internationally respected indices of social development, an organization in the Netherlands associated with the World Bank, Oman ranks higher than the United States in terms of intergroup cohesion. So Oman is actually higher than the United States in terms of cohesion. This is brought about by leveraging this pre-existing culture and enhancing it even further. The Sultan, himself a member of a minority school of Islam, as we learned from Valerie, that is Ibadism, and most Omanis, whether Hindu, Sunni, Shi'i, Jabali, or Shihui, have embraced a moderate vision of religion and their own identities, seeing the benefits of tolerance over what the Sultan condemned as extremism of any kind, quote unquote. Although other smaller Gulf states, such as Qatar and the Emirates of the UAE, have been able to rely on a sense of group cohesion around a relatively small population that follows similar religious traditions and even blood ties, Oman was once an empire and had always been a center of trade and functional multiculturalism, a picture painted vibrantly by the famed anthropologist Frederick Barth. Oman also simply had a larger population and diversified economy based on a larger and diverse geography historically. Entrepot trade flourished over several periods, and Sohar, a port to the north of Muscat, was the most prosperous Islamic city in the world in the 10th century, with houses for over 12,000 sea captains. Even before oil, Oman was one of the world's largest exporters of dried limes, a protection against scurvy for Indian Ocean merchants and sailors, and dates, which were exported in massive quantities to countries as far away as the United States. Contrary to stereotypical visions of Arabia filled with empty desert, Oman had cattle herds in the Zofar, and a vast land of protective palm groves in the Batina region that has maintained significant populations producing glassware and pottery for centuries, with water infrastructures and canals called aflaj or falaj. And I was able to visit Fanja, which is this beautiful town just outside of Muscat, on my trip during the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center Fellowship. And you see there when they use the falaj, these water channels, it shows you the nature of this group cohesion. Every person within the community has his designated time to use the water. And every person is involved in this informal but very effective process of group negotiation. So negotiation is indelibly a part of the very economy and history of Oman. Oman is different. You can see it even in the skyline of the capital, Muscat. Unlike other GCC states, development has not taken out the historical character and identity of the place. Although there are none of the highest buildings in the world and none of the largest or flashiest shopping malls, Oman has maintained a careful approach. This is reflected in Sultan Qaboos's State of the Sultanate speeches delivered on National Day, November the 18th each year. He has often called Omanis to, quote, restore the past glories of the Sultanate and to preserve the idea of Oman rooted in history while still embracing modernization and reform. Although development in major oil production started a few decades later than other Gulf states, in 1967, Oman was able to learn from some of the missteps of wealthy Gulf neighbors. In Qaboos's words, quote, it is not wise nor good policy to be dependent on oil as a sole resource to enhance our development, unquote. For instance, the Sultan and various ministries have worked since the 1990s to increase privatization and development and return investment income, often which is invested abroad by Omani, so to bring that money that is invested abroad back to Oman, and putting that money squarely in national development plans. Privatization and open markets was a feature of Oman's history, as merchants were required to pay a low 5% duty on all imports. Indeed, Oman's Vision 2020, a long-term development plan, is coming to fruition. And the status of Oman as an economic dynamo is only increasing, as some of these examples, which I am only putting up on the screen due to lack of time, demonstrate. Although the current low cost of oil may seem an impediment, Oman has maintained significant reserves, not just in terms of cash, but also in terms of human capital and social development. The evidence is abundant that opportunities from oil are neither automatically a curse nor a blessing. Different countries and different leadership in those countries have produced very different outcomes. Oman remains one of the most successful models of modernization in an oil economy. With or without the acceleration provided by petroleum production, the leadership of the Sultan and of the people of Oman is based on the unique character of Oman, a character preserved by a focus on culture and heritage and not just GDP. The future is bright for Omanis due to their persistent and cohesive struggle, one that has not destroyed the past, as previous rulers may have feared, but has maintained the idea and character of the country of Oman. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen. I'd now like to introduce, coming from Muscat, Dr. Al-Mukhtar Saif Al-Abri, who is a scholar of economics and finance at Sultan Qaboos University. We're very glad to have him with us today. His own research is on exchange rates, international financial integration, and not least the macroeconomics of the oil trade. He's published in many international journals, including Economics Letters, Economic Modeling, International Review of Economics and Finance, and the International Review of Applied Economics, and the OPEC Energy Review. I'm very pleased to present him here today. He will talk about the current situation of the Omani economy. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to stand in front of you to talk a little bit about the main features of Oman's economy and the future prospects. Right, I think I will organize my talk today in three main dimensions. So I will first talk about the status quo of economic development in Oman. Then I will talk about the risks and challenges to sustain this economic development. And finally, I will talk about the future prospects and directions. Right, as has already been reiterated today, Oman is a middle-income developing economy that is highly dependent on natural gas and crude oil. The population of Oman is now nearly 4 million, of which 56% are nationals and 44% are expats. Oman produces around 900,000 barrels of oil a day, and in terms of economic structure, oil and natural gas, it represents 50% of the output of the country, while the other sectors represent the other 50%. Okay, oil and gas also represent 80% of total government revenues. The economic development in the country has been phenomenal, as we have been here today. Oman started from a point of no infrastructure, no institutions before His Majesty assumed the leadership of the country in 1970. Today, we have achieved remarkable achievements in terms of the standard of living, the infrastructure, the human resources. Along with that, we have sound fundamentals of the economy in terms of stable and expanding financial sector, and also the external debt of the country is low at below 5%. Right. Something that you need to highlight in terms of the economic development of the country is the ability to indigenize the labor force of the country. Omanis, they represent now a large part of the labor force, especially with skilled jobs. Right. Another feature is that despite the rough terrain of the country and the distant provinces and towns, the development has reached every single corner in Oman with almost the same quality. Another thing I want to highlight is the key policy reforms that the country has taken during the last like a decade. One important policy reform was the efforts to integrate with the rest of the world and promote free trade and allow foreign investment in the country. Now Oman ranks currently 31st in terms of enabling trade index, and that was dramatic improvement from the 50th rank in 2007. Another important policy reform was the institutional development. Okay, in 2011, there was a kind of a restructure of the judicial system. Now the judicial system is independent from the state. Also, there was more power given to the state and to the Shura Council, the Consultation Council, which is the elected council, in terms of revising and proposing legislations and also supervising the government. Another thing is more authorities has been given to the state audit institution, which is the supervisory kind of independent from the government that reports directly to His Majesty. Okay, Oman also has efforts to enforce property rights and also commitments to environmental protection. All of these reforms were directed toward moving the economy of Oman toward a market-based economy with less intervention from the government. Okay. Another thing I want to highlight is the long record of strategic development planning in the country. Oman was first in the Gulf to develop a strategic plan. We call it Vision 2020, and that was in 1995. Okay, and in these visions, we developed the long-term objectives along with the specific targets and the policies to implement these plans. Okay, along with them, there is the 5-year plans that will make these targets operational. Right. Now, the main goal of these plans was always moving the economy from a government-run economy to an economy that is dependent on private enterprise, or moving the private sector from being in the periphery to the very center of the economy. Now, given the finite nature and the dwindling oil reserves, beside the cyclical fluctuations of oil prices and so on, there are challenges that our economy faces. And in the short run, the main challenge is to create jobs for the nationals. The population of Oman is young and vibrant, and that is kind of a pressing challenge for the government. In the long term also, given the dwindling oil reserves and so on, the economy has to diversify away from oil sector, okay, and that should be done by developing the private sector. Now, as of today, the private sector is dominated by few large firms, and they usually engage in, I would say, like less value-added activities, and they don't employ lots of the national labor force. They always favor the foreign cheap labor. Okay. Another challenge is Oman is a small economy, and therefore future growth should always depend on export-oriented industries, and this will require improving the productivity and the competitiveness of these industries. Okay. Now, along with these challenges, there are future prospects. The country is blessed with many competitive advantages that, if have been employed well, we can move the economy to its long-term objectives. Okay, the first competitive advantage is the strategic and unrivaled location, as have been reiterated today. Also the stable political and social environment in the country, the diverse geography, the high growth in labor force, and the developed physical infrastructure. As we all know, the location of Oman is strategic. It is located in the, as a gateway to the Gulf from the Indian Ocean. It is a middle, between the Indian, the Indian continent and the East Africa. Right. And realizing this, the government has embarked recently on a major scale up of the transportation sector. Okay, as a way like to resurrect its long history of seafaring and trade. So we have now major projects in scaling up seaports and developing specialized seaports in Salalah, okay, and Suhar and Khasab. The Suhar port is going to be industrial port, while Salalah is going to be for logistics and containers. Okay, airports also, there is now we have upgrading of the existing airports, Muscat and Salalah, and also we are adding 4 new airports. Another thing is the National Railway project, and that is going to connect these ports, and also it's going to be part of the GCC wide railway project, which is going to enforce Oman's ambition to be the transport hub in the region. All right, now the development trajectory of the country has taken a significant turn with the development of the port of Duqm. Now, the government is developing there a huge kind of economic zone where we have a dry deck, logistics center, greenfield investment platform, and so on. So already, like, the dry deck has finished, and now receiving ships. There are hotels, and development is taking place, and a city is emerging there. Right. The other kind of competitive advantage of Oman is the diversity of its geography. The geography of Oman is rich with different kind of terrains, landscapes. Also, we have Oman is a home of many rare species. So all of these gives these prospects to develop the tourism sector and renewable energy sources. Okay. Finally, I will conclude with the future directions. The ability to transform the Oman's economy will highly depend on transforming the private sector into an agent capable of creating more jobs and better jobs. And that will require like moving to areas with more labor intensive that will create opportunities to the national labor force, and particularly investment in innovation and knowledge economy. Already, the government has taken several steps by developing the Industrial Innovation Center and the Research Council that's going to devise policies and provide funding to innovation and technology. And I will leave the prospects of small and medium enterprises to my colleague, Dr. Suleiman, because he will highlight that also. And finally, I will highlight the foreign investment rule as another source of diversification in the economy. The country has shown recently progress in terms of promoting foreign investment by simplifying procedures and launching the one-stop shop for foreign investors. We can also couple that with directing foreign investment toward sectors that build on the competitive advantage of the country. And finally, the last thing I will talk about is that with the development of Oman as a transport hub in the region, then other industries will also be promoted, industries that are more export oriented, like tourism, with Oman getting more globally recognized in the world, then that will promote also tourism and other sectors like higher education, international conferencing and training, quality healthcare, industries that are centered in logistics and re-exports also. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mukhtar. And finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Suleiman Vasti, an economic development expert who has worked in many countries over 25 years, beginning with the Planning Commission of Pakistan and then with many assignments with the World Bank and the United Nations and the UN Development, UNDP, including recently he was ran the Country Program Action Plan for Iraq, developed by the UNDP. He's an adjunct scholar at the Middle East Institute and a founding member of the Middle East and North Africa Consultant Association. And he has come today to talk particularly about the so-called SMEs, small and medium enterprises, which Governor Huntsman mentioned earlier as a major priority of the Omani leadership, and he will tell us more about that and the challenges and the political implications. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, good afternoon. My fellow panelists have talked about where Oman has been in terms of renaissance and where it's now at the moment. I would like to go a step forward and say, where are we going now? And that brings me to the topic of sustainability of socioeconomic reforms in the Sultanate of Oman. In explaining what I mean by sustainability, it's the resilience to extenuating circumstances and shocks, be it the terms of trade, be it decline in the oil prices, be it regional instability, be it internal unrest, and so forth. So the challenges are how to overcome and absorb these shocks. My esteemed colleague, Governor Huntsman, already talked about diversification and privatization and the growth of the private sector. So did Hugh. My fellow colleagues have also talked about some of the issues which we may not necessarily agree with, and that will come in the questions and answers session. But let me focus on one specific aspect of sustainability of socioeconomic reforms, which leads me to the sector of small and medium enterprises development. And I focus it on the SMEs owned and managed by Omanis themselves. And the reason I say so, it has a political economy dimension, which is developing indigenous capacity for private sector development, which is, and I'll focus as I go along. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to do three things. First is the imperative for economic diversification. What are the obstacles and pitfalls, which means challenges and constraints, and the path forward, which are actionable recommendations as we move forward. I'll have some concluding remarks, but let me acknowledge my gratitude to two special people. I worked at the World Bank on GCC countries, and especially on the Middle East and MENA region, including Oman. But two people helped me enormously in my initial research. One is Madame Amal Morsi from the Sultan Qaboos Oman Library. She opened the doors for me to do all the archives and the research. And the second very important person as a mentor was Dr. Iman al-Busaidi, who was in Muscat. So we talked about these issues, and I would bounce back ideas back and forth with her. So let me move on to the three aspects which I talked about, the imperative of why is it the diversification and small and medium enterprises. I would argue that the current economic development path is not sustainable given the fact that you have enormous constraints on public expenditures of energy subsidies to the local population, of the declining oil prices, the budget constraints, and this has to be somehow, and you have enormous pressures on the public sector employment, which needs to be tackled. Secondly, there is an urgent need for a rapidly growing population and creating employment opportunities for the Omanis. Figures range from 15% unemployment to 25% unemployment. And that is not sustainable, and something has to be done. I mean, these are the issues. That's why what needs to be done. And of course, that is the importance of SMEs. This is why I mentioned it's bridging the gap between the large conglomerates and the micro enterprises. I would not go into the esoteric details of what constitutes SMEs in terms of the number, the attitudinal and behavioral issues about it. So that is the importance of SMEs. Let me move on to what are the obstacles and pitfalls. Creating an indigenous entrepreneurial economy. We all know that every political system has informal rules of the game. There are possibilities of elite capture, there are possibilities of rent seeking, there are possibilities of irregularities. And before I mention that, I do recognize the Sultanate from 2013 with all the royal decrees and the creation of the special agencies have tried to address these issues. The next step would be making those tangible reforms, moving from processes to outputs to outcomes, and I'll come back. I'll move to that issue on actionable recommendations. This is the supply side of indigenous entrepreneurial economy. Just to give you one example, you can have a young Omani who can be an absentee owner of an SME, and the expatriates could having the management structure. So the issue here is you start from the inception to the management to the fruition of the enterprise itself. And one has to identify, be it public-private partnerships, be it, I don't want to have franchises, I don't want to have large subsidiaries or small, large corporations. It has to be the genuine, and the reason it comes from the fact that these people are not, have the sources of income, and these are the young entrepreneurs, and Oman is blessed with enormous amount of human capital, both expatriate and indigenous, and that has to be harnessed. On the demand side, where does the employment for the young Omanis come in who are less educated? This is, one has to strike a balance between, I don't know what the numbers are, how many, whether it's 55% expatriates or 70% expatriates, but numbers is not the issue. Here it is how to create those opportunities, because I've worked on entitlement economies like Iraq, where people are used to consumption subsidies, and they do not have the incentives to seek employment outside the public sector. So that is another pitfall when one has a challenge to move on. Finally, there is for the large corporations, Governor Huntsman talked about corporate social responsibility for large conglomerates and how to attract foreign direct investment, and that is one issue. Okay, I have to rush a little bit. Okay, where's the path forward? Oh, no, back this one, sorry. The pitfalls I mentioned, the informal rules of the game, rent-seeking behavior, the winners and losers, one needs a comprehensive, going forward, a governance, accountability, action framework, where you can identify what are the challenges which have to be faced, who are the winners, who are the losers, and what could be done. And this is in terms of having account. And the Sultanate has been doing excellent jobs in terms of symposia, and this has to be institutionalized on a regular basis, which can identify what avenues should be explored further of dealing with, and that's the GAC framework, which deals with financial irregularities and the political economy analysis and the demand side of governance, which is voice, transparency, accountability, and participation. The second topic comes from my own experience of evaluating development effectiveness, which is we move from processes to outputs to outcomes and the results on the ground. Strategies are wonderful. Directives are great. The ultimate test is how does one translate short and crisis management to medium-term policies and long-term objectives. And my particular focus is on monitoring and evaluation, which is piloting, learning, and mainstreaming. I will end this, my conclusion, because I've been asked to rush up. There's a wonderful quote by Harold Birch from my old school in London. That was roughly 50 years ago when he talked about representative and responsible government. It says, existence of an authorizing environment that is responsive to public demands while pursuing policies which are prudent and mutually consistent. In fact, responsible government carries a price of taking unpopular decisions and which has to be taken. And my own when I had begun doing initial research, I was skeptical. My initial paper was uncertainty of sustainability, a question mark. But I'm convinced, given the enormous human capital, given the political will, the commitment, these obstacles are not unsurmountable. Thank you so much, and I look forward to a vigorous discussion.
Thank you very much, Suleiman. Well, three fascinating and each very different presentations. I wanted to start off with a question of my own, maybe a little provocative, to get things going. And that is, Suleiman began his presentation saying, how do you deal with shocks? This is one of the challenges. And Al-Mukhtar also observed that 80% of revenue now comes from oil and gas. And I think Governor Huntsman mentioned that the horizon on oil is maybe 15, 20 years. It's a short-term future in terms of a major source of driving the economy. And we also know that it's had such an important part in the development that's been able to happen over the last few decades. So my question is, after oil, how do we address this shock? I'm thinking also of the current oil prices, which are falling considerably, raising the challenge of how do you diversify at the same time when you may have less resources from oil to do so. And I think each of you could maybe talk about this in different ways. Anyway, I open it up to you, and with the thought also that in 2011, there was a shock across the region, including in Oman, and at the time, oil prices were fairly high, which allowed a kind of cushion. And how do you address this challenge going forward?
Right, so very good question and timely question. Oil is kind of at the center of the economy in Oman. Now, given the cyclical fluctuations of oil, it's really a pressing kind of demand on the government to diversify and find other sources. So if we look at this, we can look at it from the short-run, dimension and from the long-run dimension. In the short run, the way usually to deal with these fluctuations was either to withdraw from the reserves, the strategic reserves, or kind of borrow to finance the deficits. While in the long run, that will require structural changes in the economy. The government has already started talking about lifting the subsidies, the fuel subsidies. The government generously subsidize fuels in the country, so that might be revisited. And the other thing is the tax base in the country might be also revisited to address the pressing need to find alternative sources for the government revenues. So, yeah, I believe that this is, the possible ways of dealing with the decline in oil prices. Now, there's another thing that I can also highlight, which is, the decline in oil prices kind of represent a real test to the diversification process. How far have we achieved in terms of diversification? It kind of evaluate the efforts by the government and the success that has been achieved in building an economy that relies less on natural resources.
Thank you. Suleiman, did you want to comment?
The decline in oil prices is not unique to Oman. It is a regional problem. It's an issue, and these fluctuations, and that's what the purpose of public sector management and public expenditure management is. You have to tighten your belts. You have to, as Dr. Mukhtar mentioned, you have to go for structural changes in the economy. And you have to live with these and diversification where you're not dependent on one, whether it's hydrocarbons or it's oil, whether there are other avenues of opportunities to be done. So these, and the oil prices might go up tomorrow. I mean, that's another issue. But the issue is that you have a long-term sustainable path. And this is where unpopular decisions could be taken in times of crises, of reduction of subsidies, reduction of energy. And the way to do it, as I was talking to one of my colleagues there, we've tried to do it in other countries like Iraq, give cash transfers to the people to survive, monetize the benefits. These are the other ways of doing it in terms of keeping the population, providing a social safety net to them. So these are the kind of changes which I'm talking about, and these are unpopular decisions.
Alan, is there a cultural solution?
Well, I actually want to take issue with I think this assumption that oil will inevitably cause a shock is not necessarily proven. I think that the opportunities are actually there in terms of the demographics within Oman as opposed to many other countries. The large and vibrant base within the youth of Oman is actually incredibly valuable. And I think what's different in Oman also in terms of its relationship to the Arabian Peninsula is the horizon of expectations is very different. It's much more realistic in many respects. You don't have this expectation that you're going to immediately enter into a high-level position. That the population of Oman is a much more, and the economy more generally, structurally and culturally, is much more firmly based. And I think the fact that the Sultan very much had an outreach to the youth after 2011 was a very smart move. And I think that will bring about sustainability in the long run. And we shouldn't disregard also all the strategic investments that have been made around the world. Oil isn't the only question. And even here in the United States, we have people who say, oh, I want you to cut the budget, but please don't touch my Medicare. So in Oman, it's not as if the crisis in terms of budget and expectations is that much different from it is in our own context, our own situation.
Thank you. Are there questions from the floor? I see one here in the back.
Hi, Dr. Al-Abri, I think you mentioned that large Omani corporations much prefer foreign labor because it's cheaper. So my question is, what practical ways are being considered to deal with that? For example, one could require all Omani firms to publish the numbers of Omani workers they have and the number of foreign workers they have, and maybe have some kind of a tax regime that over time, if they don't up the percentages, they're going to pay some taxes. But right now, you've mentioned the problem. I don't see a mention of how to actually practically deal with it.
Yes. There's one friction that might explain why, like the large companies, they favor the foreign labor, because there is no minimum wage in the foreign labor, while there is a minimum wage for the nationals. Yeah. So that's why that the imbalance is going to be perpetual. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Well, the government has tried different ways to deal with this. First, we tried affirmative actions. So we kind of imposed quotas on several, or certain sectors that this is the percentage of Omanis that you have to have in your employment, records. So we tried that for some time. We had partial success with that because then the companies, they will also try to cut costs by hiring only the Omanis with the low skills, and so they try to maneuver around that affirmative actions. So that's one thing. The other thing, the government has also embarked on a national drive to training and development of the skills of the national labor force in order to balance the demand and supply in the labor market.
Can I just add one thing?
Please.
With due respect, Dr. Muthar, preferential policies can only work to a limit. We have seen it in Malaysia, we have seen it in Singapore. The answer is not so much in the imposition of quotas, it's finding the right skill mix of Omani nationals to fill in the gap for those high-skilled labor, and gradually moving. It's a phased, incremental process. And the answer would be sometimes you provide wage subsidies to eliminate the wage gaps to go along with it. So I am not too much inclined toward preferential policies. They haven't worked as much in the comparative countries.
Let's take a few more questions. Yes. Oh, please.
This question is for Dr. Al-Abri. Oman is a country I know since 1989. I've lived and worked there, and I've spent over 20 years in the Middle East. And my background is in the tourism field, where I established a tourism destination management company in Muscat, in Oman. Now, Governor Huntsman alluded to tourism in his address earlier, but that has not been part of any panel discussion here today. So my question is, we have a shortage of hotels in Oman, particularly in the interior, Ras Al Jins, Salalah, and so forth. There is not a need for more Shedis and Shangri-Las, but there is badly a need for hotels to assist in this region where there is a lack, where people have to drive to the interior very early in the mornings. And I'm wondering, what is the government doing in terms of either assisting small micro-enterprise businesses or individual Omanis to build hotels that would actually fill this niche for the tourism market, because it is developing? Or can you give us any background on this, please?
Yes, thank you. I totally agree with you that the...
Shall we take one more question? But just, yes, please, in the back.
For Dr. Abri, Oman has introduced Islamic finance lately as compared to all the other GCC countries. But it has come out with the most extensive law regulating Islamic finance, which is a very fast-growing industry. Given its geographical location and comparatively much mature legal environment in Oman and trained lawyers, what do you see is the prospect of Oman becoming a hub for serving Islamic finance industry in that area?
Do we have one more question?
Go ahead.
Hi, Fahad Bshara. Thank you all, very stimulating papers. I had a sort of general question. We spent a lot of the day and a lot of papers thinking about sort of leadership and government in promoting economic development, but in each of these papers today there was a sort of muted claim or an allusion to the role of the judiciary in promoting economic development, facilitating economic development. And in discussions, certainly in the field of political economy, in discussions of the rise of the West or the Western world, economic development of the Western world, the judiciary has played a central role in that sort of, in those debates. And so I wonder if you could reflect or tell us a little bit more about what the Omani judiciary actually has done in terms of facilitating economic development. What independent what independent actions? Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm blanking today. Independent actions have been taken by the judiciary or in terms of facilitating economic development.
So we have tourism, Islamic finance, and the judiciary. Whoever would like to take
the judiciary one first.
as you like.
You're absolutely right. When I mentioned the governance framework, which includes both the supply side of governance and the demand side of governance, and the access to justice and the rule of law. unless you have mechanisms to redress grievances, you cannot have a flourishing SME sector or the private sector. You have to have complaints, mechanisms to be resolved. Somebody needs to go. It's not the same old traditional way of appealing to others and nothing happens. So the rule of law and actually access to justice is much more important. And it's not just providing, appointing courts and setting up lawyers and others, but monitoring it as in terms of what is being delivered as a concept of public service.
Al-Mukhtar, do you want to
Yes,
elaborate on
I
that?
want to take first the issue of the infrastructure in tourism. Yeah, I totally agree with you that the infrastructure in Oman is not, as of now, adequate to handle the growing, demand for tourism in the country. I think the government supports the initiatives in the private sector using the development bank, which is the government-sponsored bank. So they give subsidized low-interest rate loans for private companies to build hotels. They also allow for venture capitalists to come to the country and build hotels and resorts. But recently, there have been dramatic improvements in that. Many hotels are being either finished or under construction currently. Okay, can I take that also, the Islamic?
Please.
Yeah. The Islamic finance, the advantage in Oman is that we started from where the others has finished, so we built on their experiences and we looked at the successes and the failures, and we believe that this is going to enhance the development and the diversification efforts in the country. Already many of these Islamic banks develop products to these small and medium enterprises. Yeah, so we are hopeful that that's going to boost this sector.
I think we're almost out of time. I wanted to wrap up on the question about the judiciary. As an observer, I've found it very remarkable to watch the reforms that you mentioned in 2011, and particularly the anti-corruption drive, which I think in the Gulf is sort of unprecedented. And I wondered if you could just very briefly comment on the importance of transparent, developing a transparent economy, and what is sort of behind this drive.
Yes, so as I mentioned, in 2011, the state audit institutions, which is responsible for auditing the government entities and also the companies that the government has a share of 40% or more in that company. So an important law was devised, which is the law of anti-corruption or conflict of interest. So that ministers and high-ranking officials in the government, they have to declare their wealth, and they need to audit their financial positions. So this is to give the impression and the message out that the government is firmly trying to impose the governance and transparency and accountability both to the private sector and foreign investors.
Thank you.
Wait, I have one question.
Do we have time for one more?
Yep.
Okay, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Meredith Sandler with Sandler Trade, and I was at USTR with Ambassador Huntsman, and also while the Oman-US Free Trade Agreement was negotiated and signed, which is going to be 6 years old as of January 1st. And I was just curious. I was looking at the exports from Oman into the United States, jewelry, 223 million, non-oil types of things, agricultural products. But I was curious and I apologize if I missed this, I wondered if the free trade agreement has really not provided any benefits, and if not, how could it do better? Thank you.
Does anybody want to take this?
Yeah, I'm very sorry because this will require, like, I mean, finding the right data and finding out whether the free trade agreement has improved on the bilateral kind of exports between Oman and the United States. So I'm sorry, like, I cannot be of any help in this, in answering this. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention something briefly. Having just been in Oman earlier this year, I think there's a huge potential, I just want to reemphasize this, in the youth of Oman as far as an economic resource that has really been untapped. And going back to your question about tourism, there's a huge opportunity out there for 1-star, 2-star places, for a place like a bed and breakfast where you could go, and that would increase interaction not only between Omani youth, but also internationally. I think there's a very untapped resource there, and Oman is ready to boom in that direction. I'm not saying that we should have Omani hipsters necessarily, but I do think that the Omani youth are a major resource.
Well, thanks so much for an excellent panel. A lot to think about.
Thank you, Hugh. I said this morning.